Today I would like to present a theological argument that the Quran should not be viewed as a contradictory text, but rather as the culmination and affirmation of the Torah and the Gospel. I'm Cleofe from the Cleofe podcast. Let's move on to the deep dive, but as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to help spread the word. Also, if you like to contribute to our dawah, spreading Islam all over the globe, mission, then hit the join and thanks buttons. Now, Jack and Wilson, we'd love to hear your deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, if you ask most people about the big Abrahamic texts, the Torah, the Gospel, the Quran, the story you often get is one of, well, conflict.
Yeah, they're often seen as kind of rival stories, maybe fragmented, separated by centuries and different beliefs.
Exactly. But that view, that common framing, it really misses something central to Islamic theology, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And that's what we're digging into today. Our sources really emphasize that the Quran doesn't see itself as this sudden break from the past.
Okay.
Instead, it's presented as the intended climax. It's meant to be the affirmation, the completion, the final piece in this long, unbroken chain of divine messages.
Right. The final link. Let's unpack that idea, because this concept of continuity, it's the final chapter, not a whole new story. That's really interesting.
It is.
So based on the sources, the Quran actually defines its relationship to the earlier texts using a couple of key terms. What are they?
Well, the first one, and maybe the most straightforward, is Musaddiq.
Musaddiq.
Which means the confirmer or the authenticator. The Quran says pretty explicitly that it confirms the truth of the messages brought by prophets before, like Moses and Jesus.
So it's validating their origin, saying, yes, this came from the same divine source.
Exactly. It's arguing for a consistent divine purpose throughout history. It's not erasing them.
Okay, so it's putting a stamp of approval on the original divine message in those earlier books. But then you have to ask, why the need for the Quran at all if it just confirms?
And that leads directly to the second concept, Muhaymin.
Muhaymin. Right, this is where it gets a bit more complex, isn't it?
It really is. This is, you could say, the more powerful idea. Muhaymin roughly translates as the guardian, or maybe the overseer.
Guardian, okay.
So this means the Quran doesn't just authenticate those earlier messages. It also aims to clarify, preserve, and crucially correct any human additions or, misunderstandings that might have crept into those texts over time.
Okay, hold on. Isn't that a bit of a paradox? If the earlier texts were divinely inspired, how can the Quran confirm their truth, be the Musaddiq, but also claim to correct them as the Muhaymin? Doesn't correction imply they were flawed from the start?
That's a great question, and it gets right to the heart of it. From the perspective we're examining, the key is distinguishing between the original divine message and how humans transmitted that message.
Okay. The message versus the delivery mechanism, sort of?
Precisely. The sources maintain that the revelations given to Moses and Jesus were perfectly true in their original form. But, human history is messy.
Very messy.
Right. Over centuries, things happen. Political pressures, languages change, interpretations shift. The human element editing, translation choices, commentary could obscure the original clarity.
So the Quran, as Muhaymin, steps in to protect that original truth from, let's say, human interference.
That's the idea. It acts as a guardian over the truth, providing a final, pristine standard to measure against.
That clarifies the relationship nicely. Confirm the divine source, but correct the human outcome. So where does the substance of that agreement, that continuity, actually lie? What's the core message they all share?
It all comes down to Tawhid.
Tawhid, the absolute oneness of God.
Yes, that concept is the unwavering foundation. In this view, every single prophet was sent with that same core mission. Call people back to worshiping the one true God without any partners or compromises.
And you can trace that message through history, can't you? The sources are pretty clear on that timeline.
Absolutely clear. Think about Abraham, his struggle against idol worship.
Right.
Then Moses declaring in Deuteronomy, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." That foundational statement.
Can't get much clearer than that.
And even Jesus' original mission, as the sources describe it, emphasized worshiping God alone. It's presented as this consistent, unbroken thread.
Okay, so if Tawhid was always the message, what does the Quran specifically add? Why is its reassertion needed? Why the Muhaymin role for this specific concept?
It's about purification. The sources really stress the Quran's role in purifying the concept of God, stripping away any association shirk or any anthropomorphism.
Making God too human-like.
Exactly. Or giving him partners, or elevating created beings to near divine status. There's this historical tendency, it seems, to try and make God more relatable, perhaps, by giving him human traits or intermediaries.
And the Quran pushes back hard against that.
Very hard. It attributes any deviations from pure monotheism found in later religious practices, not to the original prophets like Moses or Jesus.
But to human interpretation.
Yes, to human innovations that sort of muddy the waters. The Quran aims to restore what it sees as the original sublime simplicity and transcendence of the concept of God.
Restoring that majestic idea, that emphasis on pure monotheism naturally connects to the messengers themselves. If they all preach this oneness, then they must be connected somehow.
Precisely. This leads us to the idea of the Brotherhood of Prophets.
Tell us about that.
Well, Islam requires reverence. For all the prophets mentioned, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, Solomon, Jesus, right up to Muhammad. They're seen as this interconnected family, really.
Oh, each playing a part.
Each fulfilling a specific role in one continuous divine plan. And the sources are firm on this. Denying any prophet mentioned in the Quran is actually denying a fundamental part of Islam itself.
And there's specific honor given to figures like Moses and Jesus, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Moses is deeply revered, recipient of the Torah, a powerful prophet, leader of his people, giver of law.
And Jesus.
Similarly honored. Recognized as a prophet, the Messiah, his miraculous virgin birth, is affirmed, bearer of the gospel. The Quran confirms their miracles, their importance.
Yeah.
It reinforces that idea of continuous, progressive divine communication.
This brings us back to Muhaymin again. The correction aspect. We touched on human error, but can we get more specific? Why was correction needed? What kinds of distortions are we talking about?
Well, the sources suggest the challenges were immense for earlier scriptures. Not necessarily theological flaws in the original message itself, but issues with transmission.
Like lost texts, language issues.
All of the above. Loss of original manuscripts over time, languages evolving or dying out, translation difficulties, political pressures on communities. Imagine trying to preserve texts perfectly through centuries of upheaval.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom.
Scribes made copies, interpretations were debated, sometimes texts were edited to fit certain agendas or cultural contexts. The human element was always present.
So the Muhaymin role is almost like an historical corrective, trying to get back to the original signal through all that noise.
That's a good way to put it. One source uses a nice analogy. It's like removing rust from a precious artifact to reveal its original luster.
Oh, I like that.
The Quran positions itself as the way to see the original clear picture where other accounts might have become obscured. And the most prominent example of this, rust removal, if you will, concerns Jesus.
Okay, let's focus on that. How does the Quran correct the record regarding Jesus while still honoring him?
It strongly affirms his status. Prophet, Messiah, his miraculous birth, his miracles, the gospel he brought, all confirmed.
Right.
But it unequivocally refutes the idea that he was divine, or the literal Son of God. This is where the absolute insistence on Tawhid, on God's oneness, comes in most forcefully.
So from this perspective, it's not disagreeing with Jesus' original message.
Correct. It's presented as correcting later theological developments made by humans, developments that introduce the concept of association, by elevating a prophet to divine status. It's seen as restoring the pure monotheism Jesus himself taught.
That's a crucial distinction. Affirm the messenger, affirm the miracle, but correct the interpretation if it violates that core principle of oneness. Okay, this whole structure, continuity, correction, culmination, it suggests the final messenger wasn't just some random event, but something anticipated.
Exactly, which leads us into the idea of prophetic echoes.
Prophecies in earlier texts pointing forward.
That's the argument from Islamic scholarship, that signs and prophecies were placed in earlier scriptures to prepare people for the final, universal message and messenger. It suggests a long-term divine plan.
Okay, where do we see these echoes? Let's start with the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 18.18 is often cited.
Yes, that's a key one. God tells Moses, I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee, and will put my words in his mouth.
Okay, break that down. What are the key pointers here, according to Islamic interpretation?
Two main things. First, from among their brethren.
Who are the brethren of the Israelites?
Traditionally understood as the Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael, Abraham's other son. Prophet Muhammad descended from this line. So it points to a related but distinct lineage from the prophets who came through Isaac.
Okay, lineage is one. What's the second point?
The phrase like unto thee, meaning like unto Moses.
Why is Muhammad seen as more like Moses than, say, Jesus?
Well, think about their life roles. Jesus' mission was primarily spiritual. He didn't lead armies or establish a state or bring a comprehensive legal code in the same way Moses did.
Right.
Muhammad, however, like Moses, was born naturally. He married, he became a political and military leader, he brought a detailed legal system, the Sharia, and he led a community out of polytheism into a functioning monotheistic state. In those aspects, lawgiver, leader, head of state, the parallels to Moses are seen as much stronger.
And that final part of the verse, and we'll put my words in his mouth.
That's seen as a perfect description of Quranic revelation. Muhammad wasn't composing the Quran. The teaching is that he was reciting word for word what was revealed to him by God via the angel Gabriel.
So God's words literally put in his mouth.
Exactly. Emphasizing he's a recipient, a messenger, not the author of the message itself.
Okay, that's the Old Testament example.
Yeah.
What about the New Testament? Jesus himself speaks of someone coming after him, right? The Paraclete.
Yes, in the Gospel of John, Jesus talks about the Comforter, sometimes translated as advocate or helper or the Spirit of Truth. He says it's actually necessary for him to leave so that this Comforter can come.
Setting up an expectation.
Definitely. A sense of waiting for something or someone essential for completion.
And John's Gospel gives specific characteristics for this Comforter, especially in chapter 16.
It does. Two are particularly highlighted in Islamic commentary. First, he shall not speak of himself, but whatsoever he shall hear, that shall he speak.
Echoing the Deuteronomy prophecy, again, not his own words.
Precisely. It reinforces the idea of receiving and transmitting divine revelation verbatim, matching the Islamic understanding of the Quran's origin. Muhammad didn't speak on his own authority in the Quran. He conveyed God's words.
And the second characteristic.
He shall glorify me, meaning he will glorify Jesus.
And how is Muhammad seen to fulfill that?
By affirming Jesus' high status, confirming his prophethood, his miraculous birth, his role as the Messiah, defending his honor, while, from the Islamic view, correcting the human error of deifying him. So he glorified Jesus in the way Islam believes Jesus ought to be glorified, as a great prophet of God.
So the argument is that these aren't just coincidences, but intentional signs woven into previous revelations, pointing towards this final message.
That's the theological position, yes. It paints a picture of a unified divine plan unfolding over millennia.
Which brings us to the culmination, Muhammad being called the Seal of the Prophets.
Right. That title, Seal of the Prophets, is loaded with significance. It means the message has reached its final, complete, and universal form.
Universal meaning for all people, for all time.
Exactly. Applicable until the day of judgment. The era of new prophets bringing new scriptures is considered closed. The guidance is complete.
And this finality is tied directly to how the Quran itself was preserved, isn't it? Especially compared to the challenges faced by earlier texts we discussed.
Absolutely. This is a major point. It underpins the Muhaymin role. While earlier texts faced centuries of complex transmission, copying errors, lost originals.
The historical challenges.
The Quran's preservation was different. It was widely memorized by thousands during the Prophet Muhammad's lifetime, and simultaneously written down. Then, very shortly after his death, it was compiled into a single standardized text under the first caliphs.
So that process is seen as ensuring its integrity.
Yes, this meticulous, multi-pronged approach to preservation is seen as divinely ordained protection, ensuring the final, complete message remains pure and unaltered by the human factors that inevitably affected earlier transmissions. It guarantees the final standards remains intact.
Okay, so tying this all together for our listener, what's the big picture takeaway from this deep dive?
I think the main takeaway is that, from the Islamic perspective, the Quran isn't meant to be seen as standing against the Torah and Gospel, but as standing upon them, in a way.
Building on them.
Building on them, confirming their original truth, completing their message, and ultimately providing the final, preserved, universal version of that core message of Tawhid. It's presented almost like the final act of a grand divine symphony.
A divine symphony, I like that image. Taking the melodies from earlier revelations, the justice of Moses, the compassion of Jesus, and weaving them into one complete masterpiece.
That's the idea. Fulfilling the promises made earlier, finalizing the guidance that started way back at the dawn of humanity, offering that ultimate coherence.
It's a powerful framework. So a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on. How does recognizing this claimed continuity change how you might view sacred history?
Yeah, if you consider the idea that the final universal truth wasn't intended as a sudden break, but was actively foreseen and even announced within the very text that came before it.
Does that reframe how you read those earlier texts? Does it suggest less of a series of separate divine attempts and more of a single, continuous narrative purposefully heading towards its completion? Something to think about.
Definitely something to ponder. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. I hope you've gained some valuable insights. If you're a truth seeker, yearning for divine light and ready to step out of darkness, now is your moment. The truth is that Allah is the one and only creator of the universe. He has sent over 124,000 messengers and prophets to guide humanity, starting with Adam and culminating with the final messenger, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. If you resonate with this message, you might be ready to embrace Islam. Simply recite the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. For further support, feel free to join our WhatsApp group. You can send us a private message there. The link is in the video description. Don't wait until it's too late. We look forward to connecting with you soon.